The Cumminsville murders were a series of 5 unsolved serial murders which occurred in the present-day Cincinnati neighborhood of South Cumminsville between 1904 and 1910. After taking a 6-year-long period of inactivity, the killings resumed with 2 new victims in 1910, before abruptly ceasing again, never to continue. Victims: Mary McDonald. On April 30, 1904, 32-year-old Mary McDonald, from Saginaw, Michigan, was horribly murdered at the Big Four Railroad railways. McDonald lived with 24-year-old Mrs. Finley on East 7th Street, and on the date of the murder, she had been spotted by several witnesses in the vicinity of Chester Park. Later on, McDonald visited the homes of the Stagmans, near Knowlton's Corner, with John Stagman later driving her back to the city. At around 11 o'clock, he left her on College Hill and Main Street, and that was the last seen of her. In the morning, the dying McDonald was found on the railway by a freight train engineer and taken to the city hospital, where she only managed to say her name before succumbing to her injuries. She had a bruise on the back of her head, her left leg being severed up to the knee, and had been robbed of all her money. There were 2 theories surrounding her death: that she had been murdered because of jealousy, or that the drunken McDonald, allegedly accompanied by somebody, had met her end by an incoming train. Neither theory could be backed up by evidence, especially the latter, as conductors and motormen questioned around the city didn't recall a woman resembling McDonald boarding a streetcar. Soon following her death, the case was quickly forgotten. Louise Mueller. On October 2, Louise Mueller's body was discovered in a clump of weeds in the district's Lover's Lane. Mueller had 2 deep wounds extending down to her face, and the base of her skull had been fractured. According to several witnesses, Mueller, who had had multiple partners, had planned to visit her lover Frank Eastman. She had been observed listening to a socialist orator's speech near her home and not far from the Lover's Lane. Initially, it was also thought that she had been struck by a train, but it was later changed to possible homicide. There were no strong suspects in the killing, as Mueller had no known enemies and had been on good terms with her several lovers. Alma Steina Jewig. On November 3, the body of 18-year-old Alma Steina Jewig, a highly respected telephone operator who also sang in her local Episcopal church choir, was found in a vacant lot at the Spring Grove Cemetery, near Winton Place, by a streetcar conductor. Steina Jewig's head had been bashed in with a club, her eyes wide open, some teeth missing, and her face was in a pool of blood. In her hand, she held a transfer ticket. A bloody trail indicated that her corpse had been dragged into the open field, apparently by a large man, as noted by the footprints left behind, which were from heavy boots. The day before, Steina Jewig left her office and was telephoned by her boyfriend, who offered to pick her up. However, Steina Jewig replied that she had been to a dance and was tired, simply wanting to return home and lay down in bed. She was observed boarding the streetcar with a man, as told by conductor Frank Lemmy, who he claimed often rode alongside her. It is suspected that she had been attacked while waiting for another car at Winton and was clubbed from behind, not having enough time to react. Assaults. During his initial 1904 murder spree, the killer also unsuccessfully attacked several other women, who later gave descriptions of their attacker. After failing multiple times to kill another victim, the killer ceased activity for 6 years. The cases are the following. Miss Clausing. The daughter of gardener Henry Clausing, Miss Clausing was on her way to a party, and when she crossed a bridge near Elmore Street, a man jumped out of the darkness and snatched her purse. She was then hit with a hatchet on the head, and in her fall, struck the railroad tracks. Clausing was left lying there, until she was found by a group of men, who carried her to the nearby saloon. Immediately, 2 doctors, Alexander Patty and R.H. Whelan, arrived on the scene, with Whelan performing the examination. She was later taken to the hospital and treated for 2 weeks by Dr. Whelan. Her parents wished for the case not to be disclosed by the doctor until the murder of Steina Jewig occurred. Mrs. Harry C. Wins. On November 6, while her husband Harry was out to the pharmacy to buy some medicine, a loud knock was heard on the door at 11 p.m. Mrs. Wins opened the door, at the foot of which a short, thickly built man asked for food. She declined, and the man pretended to leave but instead slipped by to the rear door of the house and hid behind it. Mrs. Wins then went out to the backyard, failing to see him in time, and was then seized by his strong grip. She struggled hard, but only managed to let out one piercing scream. In the meantime, Harry Wins had returned after changing his mind of going to the pharmacy and heard his wife scream. He dashed through the house to her aid but was hurt by the assailant, who quickly fled. Although Mr. Wins attempted to chase him down, shooting at him with his shotgun, the attacker escaped into the darkness. Dorothy Hannaford, the daughter of Samuel Hannaford, Dorothy had just left a meeting of the Young Women's Christian Association, returning to her Winton Place home. While waiting for the trolley car to arrive, not far from where Stina Dewig was murdered on the same night, a short, rough-looking man jumped out of the bushes and grasped her arm. Hannaford began screaming and was just about to get dragged to the tracks when a trolley car approached, causing her assailant to flee immediately. As a result of her experience, Dorothy was taken ill but was otherwise unharmed. Mrs. Unkelbach and Mrs. Hagerdorn, only an hour after the Hannaford attack, the two neighbors of the family were attacked in a nearby area. Mrs. Unkelbach's arm was seized by the attacker, but Mrs. Hagerdorn mustered all her strength and hit him in the mouth, making the man stagger back. Unkelbach then joined her friend in beating him, forcing the perpetrator to flee. Weimer sisters and Mamie Rodney. On November 4, the day after Stina Dewig's murder, the trio were attacked while passing by the Spring Grove Cemetery. A man appeared out of the graveyard's shadows and began hitting the girls, pinning one of them to the ground. However, he was outnumbered, with the would-be victims pulling his hair and aiming for his eyes. The attacker was forced to flee, disappearing among the gravestones. Mrs. William Wergel, her mother and Mrs. Robert Kelly, while passing through the woods on the back of the Spring Grove Cemetery at night, the trio encountered the now sought-after Cumminsville killer. The women screamed and rushed through a cornfield and back on the street, while the man went back into the woods. Mrs. Philip Gerbig. On November 17, Mrs. Gerbig was attacked near the location of Stina Dewig's murder, on two separate occasions. To her luck, she managed to fight off the attacker both times and run back to her house. Josephine Hewitt. On November 22, while on her way back home late at night, Hewitt encountered a rough-looking man who emerged from within the Spring Grove Cemetery. He tried to grab her throat, but Hewitt came prepared, and after she hit him in the left eye, she pulled out a revolver. The assailant noticed the weapon and started running, with Hewitt firing until every chamber of the gun was empty. Not wanting to wait and find out if she had hit him, she ran home as fast as she could. Detectives investigated the attack but found no trace of the man. Anna Lloyd. On New Year's Eve, 1910, the body of the 36-year-old secretary for the Wilbraham Lumber Company was found near the railroad tracks in Cumminsville. Her mouth had been gagged, her throat cut, and her face beaten and bloodied, in the same way as the previous victims. According to police, within 20 minutes of leaving her workplace alone for the first time, Lloyd was waiting for a trolley car near the Spring Grove Cemetery when she was attacked. The assailant dragged her to a suitable spot, and after a great struggle with the physically strong Lloyd, the man managed to kill her, possibly with a meat cleaver used in butcher shops. The following day, her body was found, either by two boys or by a male passerby, who quickly contacted the police. Policemen later found Lloyd's satchel a mile away from the crime scene, with all the money gone. Emma Lloyd, her mother, was reported as very ill from the ordeal, while her husband, Edward Tigg, insisted that police do better work in finding the culprit. The tensions around the murder got so high that for some time authorities believed that there would be a race war. As a response, the City Council of Cincinnati announced a reward of $2,500, and members of the lumber company issued a reward of $5,000. Mary Hackney. On October 26, 1910, the body of the 26-year-old Hackney, who had moved to the city with her husband Harley in 1906 from Louisville, Kentucky, was found in her Canal Ridge boarding house home by her spouse and one of the boarders, Charles Eckert. Her throat had been cut from ear to ear, her skull crushed, with her body and face slashed in several places, apparently with an axe. A search of the home revealed no other crime had been committed. Despite the killer leaving behind the bloodied axe, as well as a bloody thumb mark on the door casing, police were unable to determine whose they were. In a last-ditch effort, authorities drained a nearby canal in hope of possibly finding more evidence, but nothing turned up from this action. Suspects. According to all the women who survived the attacks, the Cumminsville killer wore a dark slouch hat and was short and heavily built. However, the victims were unsure when it came to his race, as some claimed it was a white man, while others thought it was a black man. On January 13, the police received a letter in which the writer claimed to have witnessed Lloyd's murder and her killer. Police tried to contact the author, only listed as S.D.M., only to later learn that the claim was just a sick hoax. Henry Cook, George Lewis, and James Fields. Henry Cook, 34, a butcher by profession, was the prime suspect of the trio to have killed Lloyd, as two girls, one of them being 14-year-old Tilly Krebs, identified him as one of two men whom she had seen leaving the crime scene at the date of the murder. Soon after his arrest, Cook was taken before a magistrate and his bond fixed at $1,000. No newspaper reports at present exist of the outcome, but it is most likely that Cook was released due to lack of evidence. George Lewis, 21, a Marine fireman, native of Cleveland, Lewis was arrested in Wyoming, Ohio, and was reportedly pretty vague about his whereabouts during Lloyd's murder. However, he was later released as authorities from Hamilton confirmed that he had been in prison at the time of the killing. James Fields, 21, the only black man arrested from the trio, Fields was held together with Cook for some time. It is unclear what exactly happened to him, but seemingly as police began suspecting that a white man had committed the murders, he was most likely released. Harley Hackney, Charles Eckert, and Herman Schwerin. Harley W. Hackney, the husband of Mary Hackney. While returning home from work with the boarder Charles Eckert, the duo found Mary's body in the home. Both were arrested on suspicion, along with Herman Schwerin, but as there was no evidence, all were subsequently released. Hackney was about to move to Alabama when he was given a witness subpoena by the coroner, forcing him to stay. Although an official inquest was started into his wife's murder, it was fruitless, and nothing came out of it. Charles Eckert, a young boarder in the Hackney's house, Charles and Harley were returning home from their jobs at the lumber mill when they happened upon Mary's body. Eckert denied anything to do with the killing, and since no evidence was found against him, he was released. Herman Schwerin, a black driver of a milk float, Schwerin was arrested on suspicion along with Hackney and Eckert, but denied having anything to do with the murder. Like the others, he was soon released for lack of evidence. Dayton Strangler. At the time of Lloyd's murder, detectives made an effort to connect her murder to a similar series of killings, which occurred in the city of Dayton. Spanning from 1901 to 1909, 5 women were murdered in a manner reminiscent of the Cumminsville murders, and the fact that the killer also wasn't apprehended led some to believe that the two murderers were the same person. Although a mentally unstable vendor named David Curtis confessed to the Dayton killings, nobody was arrested, and these murders also remain unsolved. Unnamed black man. Several days after Lloyd's murder, A crazed black man, brandishing a bloody knife and shrieking, appeared on the door of David Taliaferro's home in Ford, Kentucky. The man screamed out that he had killed Anna Lloyd, and then ran off into the direction of Richmond. Frightened, Taliaferro phoned the authorities, with Sheriff Reed and a posse of men organizing to hunt the man down with a pack of bloodhounds. However, it is unclear what happened after. Richard Finley. Shortly after the trio suspected of Hackney's murder were all released, police announced that they had arrested a 48-year-old black man named Richard Finley, who lived close to the Hackney home. He was placed under a charge, held pending investigation, but since no records of any other news exist about him, it is assumed he was released for lack of evidence. See also List of fugitives from justice who disappeared. List of serial killers in the United States. References. Further reading. J.T. Townsend, October 2009. Queen City Gothic, Cincinnati's Most Infamous Murder Mysteries. Author House. ISBN 978-1-4490-18917. Dan Wohlert, 2009. Cincinnati's North Side Neighborhood. Arcadia Publishing. ISBN 978-0-7385-77784.